So I think the first couple of points that I'm going to make might rest on a confusion, and so it could be interpreted just as a request for clarification. You could tell me where I'm going wrong. The second half of what I'm going to say, I'm a bit more confident, so hopefully you can address those as well. I want to start by taking up your question from the end of the paper. So you talk about the three developments that you've discussed, politics, anthropology and ontology, and you wonder whether they're just a repetition of the same idea in three different codes. And my impression is that they're not. And that although the reflections on anthropology and ontology have some bearing on the political question, they don't amount to a repetition of what you're asking about politics. So the question from the first part of your lecture, as I understood it, was why is it that institutions profess to grant equal liberty to citizens but continually use differences as instruments of exclusion? The kinds of cases that came to mind when I read it were things like the fact that the people who wrote some of the documents that you mentioned, historical declarations or bills of rights, were slave owners who defended slavery while at the same time making declarations about liberty and equality as ideals. People like Thomas Jefferson, several of the founding fathers, were slave owners. Anatole France's ironic aphorism came to mind. The law, in its majestic equality, forbids the rich as well as the poor to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal bread, which brings out quite nicely, I think, how it is that equality before the law can be used to unfairly place burdens on the people who are most poor and desperate. And then there were cases like you've written about elsewhere yourself, so I'm thinking of the collection that was published in English, Secularism and Cosmopolitanism, involving Islamophobia. So I was going to bring up the case of India, like Diana, the citizenship bill where Muslims are being excluded by these two bills in India. And the kind of explanation that I would be tempted to give of those exclusions would be along the lines of, well, Islamophobia, at least in part, can be explained, or the growth of Islamophobia can be explained by things like the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, wars on Muslim majority nations, that it's in the interest of American and English governments to dehumanize the people being bombed, and it's also useful for them to divide people back at home. What's the explanation for these wars? Well, to expand markets, to control oil, to basically privatize the Iraqi economy, give construction companies huge amounts of government money, private military companies, oil companies. I'm not suggesting that that's the full explanation, but this is the kind of explanation that I'd want to give for the political part. So I'd say that in the first part, I'd be guided by considerations about things like class, how the benefits of division for the ruling class, scapegoating. We need to look at the facts of these individual cases. So we might think in terms of these general categories, but we also, in each of the cases, we need to look at the facts on the ground. There's going to be specificities to the
Afghanistan has no war.
Sorry?
Afghanistan has always war, no war.
Right. Well, yeah, I think there's other explanations for that in terms of sort of American imperialism, gas, control of gas. Anyway, so the details don't matter. It's an explanation on those kind of lines rather than the kind of explanation that Etienne Balibar's offering. So the other issue that caught my interest in the first section was talk of a factual contradiction between the liberal principles and the facts of discrimination. So I'm not sure whether I've got this right. I'm interested in hearing more from you on what you take that factual contradiction to amount to. We don't usually take instances of violations of a principle to amount to a contradiction. that principle. So I think you're clear about that yourself. Within the paper, you say, I try to avoid the representation of rights as forming universal, whereas discriminations are only particular. So presumably that's not the model that you're thinking of, is particular facts contradicting the universal. But if that's not the way that you're looking at it, I wonder exactly what it is. So the fact that people sometimes murder other people can be true simultaneously with the principle that it's wrong to murder. So I wonder whether you have in mind something like Kantian consideration. So there's the kind of Kantian cases about lying and stealing where you can't universalise the principle because the university will acting on the principle, because doing so would result in a kind of conceptual breakdown of the theory. So you can't act on the principle of being able to take things whenever you want from people, because then the whole institution of property would break down and you wouldn't have the concept of stealing anything. Or lying where, if people could just lie whenever they felt like it, then the whole institution of truth-telling would break down. So that kind of...
Yes, and of course.
Right. So it could be something like that. Or I also thought of Wittgenstein. So there's the case where he talks about measurement, and he says that it's not only agreement in definitions, but also, hard as it may sound, agreement in judgments that's required for communication by means of language. What we call measuring is in part determined by a certain constancy in the results of measurement. So although we often think of facts and values as two separate realms, there's clearly some relation between the two, such that alterations in the facts can make concepts or principles obsolete, or kind of twist them out of shape or something like that. So if everyone disagreed in their judgments about the colour of objects, then the whole practice of talking about the colour of objects would break down. What exactly is going on in the case of liberalism versus discrimination amounts to a contradiction. When it came to the second section of the paper about anthropological differences, one of the things that came to mind was the fact that nature or natural is a term like real or reality that has various different contrasting terms. So Jay Austen pointed out that one and the same object might be both a real X and not a real Y. An object that looks like a duck might be a real decoy duck, not a toy duck, but at the same time not be a real duck. So I'm not sure if natural works in quite the same way, but we certainly do use natural with different meanings and with different contrasts. So it seems to me that that's what you're pointing to when you talked about the different construals of natural law and natural rights and things like that. I wonder, maybe you can so we might contrast natural with construction. Something might be deemed natural and be constructed. We might contrast natural with artificial. We might contrast, say, an assemblage of plants. Somebody might ask whether the assemblage is natural, meaning is it made up of plants and not of just plastic substitutes of plants. But somebody else might be wondering whether the assemblage is natural and have in mind whether the plants just arrange themselves like that. So is it a kind of natural outgrowth of seeds being blown in the wind or something like that. Nature taking its course, or whether it's something that's been created by the human hand. So we also contrast natural things with acquired things, things that are given to us by nature and the things that we learn. And there's a kind of blurriness to that contrast as well. So we talk about second nature, things that we acquire but become natural to us. So I wonder if these kinds of ambiguities are what you had in mind when you talked about both of the terms of the contradiction being referred to nature. because you then go on to talk about natural right, natural law, human essence, and natural differences. And the final concern that I had was whether what you were doing in the final two parts of the paper, when you discuss anthropological differences and ontological difference, was really grammatical investigation. So a reason for thinking that was the use of modal language in the paper. So when you talk about these anthropological differences, you suggest that they must be the way that they are. It must be that if somebody is a human being, that they have a sex. It must be that if somebody is a human being, that it falls into one or another of these categories or along this kind of spectrum, so either real or health, that kind of thing. So the impression that I get is what you're talking about there is a kind of definition of human nature rather than anything factual. You weren't talking about particular things that you'd observed going on in the world at particular times. Rather, what you were doing was trying to get clear about concepts like human nature, and in the final section about relations. So I wonder what you present as an ontological investigation is really grammatical investigation by another name. The features of reality that you hope to bring to light could be shadows cast by grammar. I wonder what you make of Wittgensteinian criticisms of metaphysics. That's obviously an enormous question. So to answer it, I wonder whether you could kind of give a defence of the need to talk about ontology. So it seems to me that it's not something worth pursuing talking in those terms. Maybe you could defend having an ontology. Okay, that's it.